Welcome back to today's Explainer, everyone. Now, if you're a focused learner who loves unpacking the wild, behind-the-scenes dynamics of the tech industry, well, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're exploring a massive, frankly mind-bending, hypothetical shift in global tech power. We're going to map out an alternate reality, a total reshaping of the digital world that would fundamentally alter our phones, our workplaces, the stock market, and honestly, even the emotional identity of the entire tech industry.
So let's just dive right into this highly provocative question. What if Microsoft beat Apple by a mile in the AI race? Seriously, I want you to imagine waking up to a world where the most talked about breakthroughs, the most trusted digital assistants, the most widely used intelligent platforms, they all carry one single name right at the center, and it's Microsoft. Picture those headlines. Imagine the sheer market panic, the investor shock, the frantic corporate scrambling, and the endless fanboy arguments online. What if the company that's famous for quiet, behind-the-scenes enterprise power suddenly became the undisputed, loud, and proud leader of the most important technology revolution of our time?
It's fascinating to think about the perfect contrast between the legacy identities we've just universally accepted for years now. For decades. We've associated Apple with the absolute pinnacle of the consumer experience, right? They're cultured, hardware-driven, beautiful. You don't just buy an Apple product, you kind of join an identity. And then on the flip side, we have Microsoft. They're the practical backbone, the invisible layer of software and infrastructure that powers all our real work behind the scenes. So at first glance, the idea of Microsoft totally eclipsing Apple culturally, it sounds almost impossible. But AI is rewriting this exact dynamic.
Because, see, in this new AI race, winning isn't about launching a flashy new device or hosting a beautifully produced product launch. The race has completely shifted from beautiful gadgets to intelligent ecosystems. If Microsoft won by a mile, it would mean they figured out something much, much deeper than just slapping a novelty chatbot onto a smartphone. It would mean they made intelligence completely reliable, incredibly scalable, and literally indispensable across the entire digital economy.
Which brings us to a really massive concept: architectural dominance. What does that actually mean? Well, it means Microsoft wouldn't just be selling a winning product. They would become the absolute baseline of the future, the foundational environment. New startups would build on Microsoft's AI stack simply because it's the quickest path to scale. Governments and institutions would prefer it because, well, it's already embedded in the systems they trust. Once developers start building around one core AI ecosystem, it creates this massive snowball effect. So Microsoft wouldn't just have the best AI, they would become the actual environment where everyone else builds theirs.
Section 1. Rewiring the modern workplace. Let's look at how this builds directly into the office environment, completely transforming white-collar work from the ground up.
I want you to visualize your own daily workflows right now. Under this new Microsoft standard, your emails, drafted instantly. Those long, incredibly tedious reports, summarized in seconds. Your meetings automatically produce highly accurate notes and action items without anyone lifting a finger. Microsoft wouldn't just be a software vendor anymore. They'd become the ultimate labor multiplier. Literally every single white-collar worker would have an AI assistant natively built into their documents, their code, their schedules, and their search.
This shift actually goes so deep that companies would fundamentally reorganize their timelines around it. The efficiency gains would be so huge that businesses would start measuring their productivity in a brand new before and after language. Before Microsoft AI and after Microsoft AI. When a company's tools can finish projects faster and totally remove friction for developers and managers, that tech transitions from being just a cool available option to being entirely normal and, frankly, required.
Let's just quickly run through how this operational AI embeds itself into absolutely every single department. You've got executives suddenly using AI strategists for real-time scenario modeling, HR, finance, sales, ops, they all run incredibly fast. Your spreadsheets aren't just rigid grids of numbers anymore, they actually become conversational tools, presentations generate and refine themselves in minutes. By doing all of this, Microsoft essentially owns the tools that define the undeniable rhythm of modern employment.
Section 2. Building the new ecosystem. So, let's expand this ripple effect outward to see how the broader world reacts.
Consider the massive shift in institutional standards we'd see here. In consumer design, sure, Apple definitely remains the standard, but in enterprise AI, it moves from being super fragmented to being totally owned by Microsoft. And perhaps most importantly, education. While Apple has always had this really strong appeal with creative tools, in this scenario, schools and universities flock to Microsoft. Why? Because they have to prepare students for the AI-driven workforce. Microsoft essentially owns the narrative of readiness, creating a direct, unbreakable pipeline from education straight into employment.
And as more institutions, we're talking law firms, hospitals, universities, as they rely on this ecosystem, it becomes what we can basically call the digital muscle memory of the world. The more people use it day in and day out, the harder it becomes to leave. Actually, scratch that. Leaving becomes almost impossible. Once Microsoft is embedded in the logic of work itself, its invisible power is completely cemented. Leaving the ecosystem wouldn't just mean swapping out some software, it would mean totally disrupting how your entire organization actually thinks and operates.
Section 3. Apple on the defensive. Where exactly does this leave the undisputed master of consumer desire?
Well, this shift would take a profound psychological toll. For years, Apple's reputation has been built on anticipation, right? This feeling that their products arrive after careful, meticulous perfection. But if Microsoft is suddenly miles ahead in AI, Apple's forced into a pretty painful new position, not the leader of the future, but the defender of a legacy. Just imagine the impact on their immensely loyal fan base and on investor sentiment. They would no longer own the mindshare of the most important tech transformation of our generation.
Now, obviously, Apple wouldn't just collapse. No way. They are far too rich and powerful for that. They would inevitably mount a counter-strategy, probably focusing heavily on on-device intelligence, really doubling down on privacy-first AI, and emphasizing their world-class premium hardware integration. They'd still release beautifully curated tools inside their famous walled garden. But the reality is, compared to Microsoft's sweeping enterprise momentum, that garden might start to feel a bit small and maybe a bit quiet. It would feel much more like a chase rather than a lead.
It ultimately comes down to this really painful gap. On one side, you have making the beautiful object. On the other, making the object think for you. Apple's hardware craftsmanship is incredible, arguably unmatched in history. But if users increasingly care about what their devices can suggest, what they can generate, and what they can automate, then hardware alone just isn't enough to control the cultural conversation anymore. Microsoft would literally be shaping the daily behavior of the digital world, essentially doing half your thinking for you.
Section 4. A new tech culture. Let's see how this creates a complete inversion of consumer perception and tech identity.
This leads to a massive, almost unthinkable cultural twist. Microsoft actually becomes cool again, but not because their products suddenly look like sleek fashion accessories. They generate intense consumer desire because intelligence itself becomes desirable. People want the platform that saves them time and fundamentally understands where the digital world is going. Apple would totally remain the master of taste, for sure, but Microsoft becomes the master of capability. The invisible power behind the scenes suddenly becomes visible and deeply, deeply glamorous.
Let's zoom out to the geopolitical stakes for a second, because this dominance definitely does not stop at office culture. If Microsoft leads by this much, they shape international standards and regulations. They dictate debates on digital sovereignty and security. They become the absolute default infrastructure for global governments. Think about it. AI isn't just a neat little app. It's a strategic national capability that dictates information flow and industrial efficiency. Microsoft's lead would turn them from a simple software vendor into what is essentially a platform civilization, influencing global power.
Section 5. The Era of Intelligent Systems. As we bring this explainer to a close, what does this whole thought experiment actually teach us?
Well, it highlights a massive philosophical shift in the tech industry. In the age of AI, usefulness matters more than glamour. The tech industry, and honestly we as consumers, might finally realize that smart infrastructure, saving time and reducing our daily cognitive load hold much more lasting prestige than brand aesthetics alone. We are rapidly transitioning from the era of hardware prestige straight into the era of software intelligence, where the invisible system behind your screen matters far, far more than the glass and metal in your hand.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. If this timeline comes true, it means humanity made a very specific choice. Which do we trust to shape the future? The beautiful machine or the intelligent system? Because once that choice is made, the next decade of technology will never look the same again. If this explainer sparked your curiosity and maybe helped you see the digital world a bit differently, I warmly invite you to hit subscribe. We have a lot more explainers coming that unpack exactly where power really lives in our modern age. Thanks so much for learning with me today.